Oh,
That's
oh. Did it end my screen share or can you still see it?
what's up.
Okay.
That's,
All right,
yeah.
cool.
Okay. So, good evening and welcome. I'm so pleased you've joined the Friends of San Pedro Valley Park's Natural Sciences series. I'm Yula Stroganoff, Programs Director and Field Trips Director for the Friends, and your host tonight. The clocks have been turned back, so it's dark outside, cool, and maybe in some places rather rainy. In other words, it's a good time to tune into our webinar series. Hope you have a hot drink on the ready. We have Maddy Schwartz with us tonight to enlighten us on Western Snowy Plovers. She has graciously agreed to join us tonight to inform us about the plovers. It should prove to be a fascinating lecture for all, and especially for beginner birders as well as experienced ones in our midst. I will introduce her in just a moment. Moving on, at the end of tonight's lecture, we will have a Q&A session and we'll take some questions and read some comments. Please write comments and questions in the question section, and let's have a courageous soul try chat and see whether it's working tonight because Adrian did some controls there, setting things up, and maybe, just maybe, chat's working. We're not sure. And yes, the lecture is being recorded and will be posted on the website. So in a couple of days or whatever. So, and our website is friends of San Pedro Valley Park.org. Friends of San Pedro Valley Park.org. Also, while I have your attention, consider becoming a member and supporting the programming. It's important to let you know that the month of December will be dark. In other words, no lecture in December, but January and February will follow with very interesting botany ones. I should also mention that on Saturday, December 6th, we will have a mushroom foray in San Pedro Valley Park in Pacifica at 10 a.m. It'll go until about 1. You will need to register on Eventbrite. The gathered mushrooms will be used by the San Francisco Mycological Society for their mushroom fair that will take place the next day on Sunday, December 7th in South San Francisco. Check their website for details. But yes, you have to sign up on Eventbrite because there's only so many people who can attend this mushroom foray in the park. And now I have the great pleasure of introducing our speaker. Maddy Schwartz is the Snowy Plover and Lease Turn Director at San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory. And she just finished her second season in this position. She has been working in the marshes of San Francisco Bay
Third
since
season.
third, third
Yeah.
season,
Maybe
sorry.
I said wrong, but third season.
Third season in the position. So, she's been working in the marshes of San Francisco Bay since 2018, right? In
Yes.
both the public and private sectors. She graduated from the University of California, Davis, with a Bachelor of Science in Wildlife, Fish, and Conservation Biology in 2017, and first became involved with the San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory in 2018 while assisting with plover surveys. When not working, you can find her reading, rock climbing, very courageous and adventurous, or hanging out with her cats and snake. So, Maddy, take it away.
Okay, thank you so much for that introduction. Yeah, I'm the science director of the Plover and Tern program at SFBBO, and I'm excited to talk to you tonight about plovers. So without further ado, let's go along. All right, so the first this is just an overview of how the presentation is going to go. So first, we're just going to talk about snowy plovers, what they look like, how to identify them in the field, and a little bit about their life history. And then we're going to talk specifically about their habitat requirements and the threats that they face. And just a note, this presentation is going to focus on plovers that nest in the bay. So on the bay side of the Coast Mountain Ranges, not on the Pacifica side. Sorry about that. We don't work on the Pacifica side, we work in the bay. But yeah, that's what the second part's going to be like. And then I'm going to give a uh, overview of how the 2025 breeding season went. Oop, that's supposed to say 2025, not 2024. Sorry. And then we're going to zoom back out and we're going to talk about the larger context of what's going on with plover management and how we're trying to increase plover success in the bay. And then the last part is just a little quick thing about how you can get involved with plovers. So here we go. Part one, the Western Snowy Plover. Look at them. They are so cute. All right, so this is what a plover looks like. They're a small ground nesting shorebird. They're about 6 inches tall or the size of a soda can, and they weigh about the same amount as 8 quarters. So they're very small, but they run very fast on their little legs. This is what the adults look like. As you can see, the male is darker than the female. The male has these dark shoulder epaulets and then a dark headband and dark eye markings, whereas the female is much more drab and brown. And the male also gets a little rusty cap on its head. You can see that the cap is a little bit rustier than the rest of the back. And so this is what the males look like during the breeding season, but then in the non-breeding season, the males will molt out of that breeding plumage and all of the birds will look the same and you can't sex them in the winter, right? Winter. So if you were to go out right now and try to look for some plovers, which you totally could see some on the beaches in Pacifica right now, I think. Not a lot, but some. You would not be able to sex them. They would just be drab and brown. This is what the chicks look like. They're precocial, which means that they are able to forage and move around for themselves within just a couple hours of hatching. So the far left picture is a chick that just hatched. You can tell it just hatched because it's still wet from being in the egg, and also it has an egg tooth on the very tip of its bill right there. And then the second picture is two chicks that are dry now, but they've also just hatched. You can see they still have the egg tooth. That typically falls off within 24 hours. But already those dry chicks, once they're dry, they'll be able to run around and forage for themselves. Then the third picture is a chick that is probably around like 3 or 4 weeks old. Um, Looks more like a bird, looks less like a cotton ball on toothpicks, but is still kind of scruffy, not able to fly yet. And then the last picture is of a juvenile that is fully able to fly. And they typically fledge in 28 to 33 days. So this is what the range of the entire plover population is. So you can see that there are snowy plovers that exist in the rest of the country and down into Mexico. There's an interior population that nests along the Great Plains and in the Great Salt Lake, and then in the and also in the Gulf of Mexico. And then there is a distinct population segment that is along the West Coast, where I have that red box that is only along the West Coast that goes from southern Washington all the way down to Baja California. And that is considered the Western Snowy Plover. And that is the population that is threatened, that's listed under the Endangered Species Act. The interior population and the Gulf Coast population is not listed on the Endangered Species Act, but the Western Snowy Plover is. The one on the Pacific coast is. So this is what their range is, like a little more zoomed in. You can see from southern Washington down to Baja California. And for throughout most of the range, their habitat is on beaches. So you can see this bird on the left is on a beach, on a nice sandy beach. Whereas in the Bay Area, where SFBBO surveys, things are a little different because they are on these old salt ponds. I don't know how much time you guys spend in the bay, but if you ever have looked at like on Google Maps and satellite images, you'll see all of those like ponds that have been carved out from the bay. Those are old salt production ponds, and that is where our plovers breed. So they breed on the salt ponds, also levees, and also dredge material that's been placed during construction projects. And so this is a little bit about the migration patterns of the Western Snowy Plover. So the Western Snowy Plover, remember that segment of the population that is listed, that those birds they stay on the West Coast all year. They do not go into the interior. They stay on the West Coast and they kind of migrate, but not really. They'll kind of just move up and down along the coast as they see fit. Sometimes birds will go further north for the winter. Like we have birds that we've banded that have shown up in Oregon or Washington in the winter. We also have a bird that showed up right at the Tijuana River mouth, right at the edge of Mexico. And then we have birds that just stay in the bay all year that are on the same ponds that we've seen them on during the breeding season, or they just go over to Pacifica, or they go to Santa Cruz or something like that. But it's very interesting because it almost seems like it's unique to each bird. Like each bird will pick a winter spot that they like and they'll spend the winter there every year and then they'll come back to the same breeding ponds. So it's a little strange, but that is how the Western population works. However, the eastern or the interior population, they will migrate to the coast for the winter. So we will get birds from the the Gulf that instead of going to the interior, they go all the way to the coast because they don't want to deal with the Midwest winter and they come all the way here. So right now, there are birds from all over there are snowy plovers from all over the country that are in the bay, but once the spring starts again, those interior birds will migrate out and it will just be the western the western snowy plover that is on the coast once again. So we do a count of plovers twice a year. It's a standardized count that is organized by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And there's one in January, that's the winter survey, and one in May, that's the breeding survey. This is the winter survey. So this has all of our data through 2024. And you can see that in 2024, last year in January, we had the highest count ever of winter or of plovers in the Bay Area in the winter, which is great. We love to see that. As overall, the trend has been going up, so that's great. So now that I'm talking about the winter, I'll just keep talking about the winter. During the winter, the birds are just kind of hanging out. They are, like I said, often going to the same wintering grounds every year, and while they're there, they're eating, they're resting, and gearing up for the breeding season. They're increasing their fat stores and just trying not to get eaten by anything before the breeding season starts. And wintering habitat, I just want to make a note that wintering habitat is very important. Oftentimes it gets overlooked because everyone is always focused on breeding and breeding success, but wintering habitat is very important. There was a study that someone at Point Blue did along the Sonoma coast, which is primarily wintering habitat, and she found that her birds were staying there for 60% of the year. So if you think about that, the wintering habitat is kind of almost more important than the breeding habitat because these adults that are like very important to stay in the population, these adults have to spend more than half the year at their wintering ground. So winter, winter, winter habitat is very important. All right, moving on to the breeding season. So the breeding season officially begins on March 1st and it runs through September 15th. Typically, the first nest is initiated sometime in the middle of March, although we have had a nest be initiated as early as the very end of February, which is really crazy. But typically, they're initiated in the middle of March. And during the and for their nests, the plovers are relying entirely on camouflage to blend in. Their entire game is to be as small and sneaky and inconspicuous as possible. You can see in this picture that they blend in very well with a sandy background, and that is the entire name of the game. So you can see that their nests are also very cryptic. Typically, they lay 3 eggs. That's their typical clutch size. The eggs are also very cryptic and speckly, and they're incubated for approximately 30 days in a simple scrape on the ground that the males will line with little flecks of whatever is in the area. So these are some photos of some nests that we've seen over the years. And so during incubation, the adults actually share incubation duties. So the female will incubate during the day and the male will incubate at night. So you can see between these two photos, you can see how much darker the male is. Even in the black and white photo, you can see that the female is just brown, whereas the male has that black on the shoulders. And then once the nests hatch, the male is the one that rears the chicks. So the female will leave and find another male to start a new nest with, and the male will take care of the chicks. And so, like I said before, the chicks are precocial, so they can forage for themselves, but they're inexperienced, they don't know exactly what they're doing. So the male will lead them to the best spots, will try to keep them out of keep them out of danger if he sees something coming. He'll start making a bunch of noise and get in the way and do like a broken wing display. If you've seen killdeer or anything like that, do a broken wing display. The males will do that to try to distract the predator from the chicks so the chicks can hide. And young chicks will just freeze and drop to the ground and not move, whereas older chicks, if they're threatened, they'll run. So yeah. And this is, like I mentioned, we do two surveys a year. This is our breeding window survey. So you can see that the line is also going up for this one, which is really great. And I didn't put anything about this in this presentation, but you can see that line at the top that at the 500 that says the RU3 goal. So um, in the Bay, when the species was listed under the Endangered Species Act, the population was split into six different recovery units, and they go basically north to south. So RU1 is at the top of the range in Oregon and Washington, and RU6 is in San Diego. And so RU3, the Bay Area, is right in the middle. And each recovery unit has a different goal for the number of birds that they're supposed to achieve in order for the species to be delisted. So the goal for RU3 is 500 birds. So we're getting closer every year. You can see we're getting a little closer. We've still got a ways to go, but we almost cracked 400 this year, which is really exciting. So yeah. All right, so that was our background on life history and field identification. And now we're going to talk about habitat and management. So this is what I'm talking about with the salt ponds in the bay. You can see all of them in this satellite imagery. So, the Bay Area prior to colonization was a complex network of sloughs and marshes. You can see in this map, I'm sorry it's so blurry, but you can see in this map that the vast majority of the habitat type was that kind of like baby poop green tidal marsh color. You can see that that was the majority of what the habitat in the bay was. And if you see that salmony kind of color, salt ponds, there was only a tiny bit of salt pan, salt flat habitat, kind of where Hayward is now. There, that's likely the only place that plovers were in the bay prior to colonization. As you can see here, if you're a plover and you want to be brown and blend in on the sand, and all of the habitat available looks like this beautiful blue and green marsh, you're not going to find that much for you there. But now, fast forward like 200 years, and everything has been diked and drained and turned into these industrial salt ponds. So you can see that that salmon color has now vastly increased. This is what the South Bay looked like in the year 2000. Now, some stuff has been restored to tidal marsh at this point, but I'll talk about that later. But yeah, way more plover habitat, and the birds definitely took advantage of that and moved in to the bay. So, these are all of the sites that SFBBO surveys. all of the main complexes. I've had them broken up kind of by like color groups. Like we survey from Hayward in the East Bay all the way to Menlo Park on the peninsula. And these are the different complexes. Did I label them? Ah, yes. Okay, so Ravenswood in Menlo Park, Alviso in San Jose, Warm Springs in Fremont, Dumbarton in Newark, Coyote Hills in Fremont, Eden Landing in Hayward, and Hayward Shoreline in Hayward. Those are all of the places that we survey, and all of those black outlines a lot around the ponds are all the places that we confirmed plover nesting activity in 2024, not 2025. This is an older map, but this is the 2024 map. Those are all the ponds that had nests on them that year. So let's talk about the threats to plovers. So you might think that um, just based off of what I just said about how all of a sudden we created all this new habitat for them, oh, maybe they're doing great in a human-dominated environment. Maybe they're one of those species like a crow or a coyote or a raccoon that does really well when humans come into landscape. No, that's not true. Unfortunately, we wish that it was, but that's not true. Um, and the main reason that the main threat that plovers face in the bay is predators from predators that do really well in a human-dominated environment, like an invasive red fox, like a raven. These species are really deadly to plovers, especially foxes. They can take out like like a whole pond's worth of nests in one night. We've seen it happen. And then this is not so much of a problem within the bay, but in Pacifica, this is more of a problem that you guys deal with, and part of the reason why I don't think you guys have much, like you guys don't really have breeding in Pacifica is because there's lots of humans on beaches. There's lots of humans, there's lots of dogs. Whoops. There's lots of humans, there's lots of dogs. All of that stuff is also not good for plovers. We have some of that in the bay. Like we do have public trails you can see on the right. We do have things like the Bay Trail and other various trail segments. People will also fly drones. I'm sure people do that at the beach too. People will also fly drones and run their dogs off leash and hop fences and, get out into places that they're not supposed to be. But for the most part, we have way less human disturbance within the Bay Area than places like um, Pacifica or Santa Cruz or San Diego or LA that their plovers are on beaches with all of these people. Yeah, that's a lot more disturbance. They also face habitat loss from lots of different areas. So invasive plants are a big one. You can see all of this invasive ice plant that has spread across the ponds. That's the main thing that we deal with here. There's also climate change, sea level rise on the beaches, not so good. And then also development coming down from the sides of, or from the urban areas. You get coastal squeeze, which is where the water comes up and the development comes down, and the amount of beach habitat that you're left with gets smaller and smaller. All of those things not good for plovers. And then this is the thing that's the most unique for the bay. So, like I said, all of our plover habitat is on all of these old salt ponds, but for a lot of reasons, lots of people want to get rid of the salt ponds. And so there's this project going on that a lot of you have probably heard of called the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project, which its goal is to open 15,000 acres of former salt pond habitat to tidal action and restore them to tidal marsh. It's a 50-year project, so it's been going on for almost 20 years at this point, I think. So we're theoretically like halfway through. But you can see there's these before and after pictures and how they like breach the levees. That's one of the first levee breaches, I believe. And then that's the middle picture is how it looked before. And then just within a couple months, there's a lot of vegetation recolonization that happens. So it's a really cool process. And so we love tidal marsh restoration because it's great for the environment. It heals like wounds of colonization. It is great for flood control, resiliency to climate change, and also the Salt Pond Project is building in a lot of um, recreation and public access opportunities like the Bay Trail. But because life is very complicated, that's not so great for the bird species that have adapted to living and breeding on these salt ponds. So species like Western Snowy Plover, like California least tern, that breed on the salt ponds, and then also migratory waterfowl like ducks and godwits and dowitchers and like curlews, all of those birds that come in the winter and use the ponds as a source of food in the Pacific Flyway. So, yay, we love tidal marsh, but oh no, what are we going to do about the impacts to plovers and terns? All right, so now we're going to go into we're gonna zoom in. We're going to see what an actual plover season kind of looks like. This is me and two of my coworkers when we were doing some band resite surveys in Alviso. So this is my flow chart. It's not up yet. Don't worry, I'm gonna go through it. This is my flow chart. That is my handy dandy uh journey of how the plover season went. So the total number of nests that we recorded this year is 460. That is a lot. That is a lot of nests, but we found 82 of those as already inactive. What do I mean by that? I mean that plover nests are very hard to find. And so oftentimes you will be surveying a pond and you will not think that you should be seeing any broods because you think like, oh, there's two nests on this pond and neither of them are anywhere close to hatching. And so there shouldn't be any chicks on this pond because those are the only two nests. And then all of a sudden you see a little cutie brood through your scope and you're like, oh, missed a nest. Okay. So we found 82 nests as inactive. So the total number of nests that we monitored is 378. But that is still, oh, I think my animation is wrong. Anyways, whatever. We'll get to it. We monitored a number of 378 nests, but we want to know whether that was like a worthwhile amount of effort for the plovers to be putting out, right? Because if there's a lot of nests, but there's a lot of nests just because they laid an egg and then the next week it got depredated, and then they lay another egg, and then the next week it gets depredated, and then they lay another egg, and the next week it gets depredated, then like everyone's just wasting their time, right? So we want to make sure that they actually were successful. So how many nests failed? 124 out of those 378 nests failed, which is 32%, which is really not bad. I have to say. We'll get there. Somehow my animation got out of order, but you'll see. What were the reasons that they failed? Wow, this is so out of order. I'm so sorry. Nope. Okay, you know what? All right, there we go. We're just gonna go through. The animation's not working. It's fine. Okay, so failed 124. Of those 124, 107 were depredated. So 28% were depredated. And then I guess how many is that? 9, 11, 17. 17 nests failed for a variety of reasons, whether abandonment, flooding, like dead eggs, or they failed, but we can't really tell why. Um, then the number that hatched was 225, which is 60%, which is much higher than average. You can see I have my little star there. It says it was a 53%, like typically it's 53% average. And so great hatch rate. So the birds weren't wasting their time. We know that they were actually like having success. And then there's 29 nests that were just unknown fate, could have hatched, could have failed, don't know. So you can see there now that everything is on the screen, 378 nests is the highest number of nests that we've ever monitored by almost 50 nests. So that's really great. And we also had this great hatch rate. So all in all, it was a very good year for the plovers. Now, this is the breeding distribution by complex. So you can see that Eden Landing had the vast majority of the nests. 41%. And I will talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. But that's honestly pretty common. Eden Landing and Hayward is always the most productive site area for us. It's the biggest, but also it has some of the like really powerhouse ponds. Then Ravenswood and Menlo Park was the second best. Then Alviso in San Jose. And then Dumbarton, Hayward, Warm Springs, Coyote Hills, Redwood City, and Mountain View were kind of the smaller complexes for this year. And this is all pretty average for where the proportion of breeding is typically found. So this is kind of a similar way of looking at the same data, but just broken down a little bit more by pond. So you can see that that big lime green slice up in the corner, that's 23%. That's one pond in Eden Landing. So one pond had 23% of our entire nests in the entire South Bay, which is really crazy. And then the other top 10 ponds were R3, A16B, R1, A12, E6B, PP1, A15, A13, and Frank's Dump. I know that doesn't really mean that much to you, but it's fine. Um, and then there were everything else, all the other ponds, all the other sites, 19 other sites to be exact, all had 10 nests or fewer. So it's kind of crazy that the top 10 ponds make up like over 80% of the total nesting quantity. Um, yeah, I always think this graph is very interesting to look at. So like I mentioned, E14 was super impressive this year. This is E14, and you can see that we had a ton of nests on it. All of those gray circles are where nests were. We had 89 nests, 73 of which hatched, which means that they had an 82% hatch rate, which is really insane. Like, this is a really crazy number. If you don't spend a lot of time with plovers, then it might not seem that crazy to you, but it's really high. I don't think we've ever had a pond have this high of a hatch rate and also have this many nests on it. So that's really, really exciting to see. And I'm going to talk more about E14 in a little bit. So yeah, right now. Now we're going to zoom back out and we're going to put this year into the larger context of how we're managing for plovers and how we're trying to help them within the Bay Area. So you can see these photos. The left is Dave Halsing, who is the project manager of the Salt Pond Project, and then that is me on the right, and we are scooping up a bunch of oyster shells, which I will talk about more in a bit. Oh, right now. I'll talk about them right now. So, um, this, like I mentioned, the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project is restoring all of, or like a lot of ponds to tidal marsh, but they also recognize that plovers and terns are important and they don't want to completely destroy all of the great plover habitat that's been created in the bay. And so they set a goal of maintaining 250 breeding pairs. No, sorry, 125 breeding pairs, 250 birds within the Salt Pond Project footprint itself. So the RU3 goal is 500, and they wanted half of the RU3 birds to be on their land, despite the fact that they were planning on getting rid of a lot of plover habitat. So if we want to figure out how to put more plovers in a smaller space, how are we going to do that? So SFBBO in like 2009 started piloting this study and idea of adding oyster shells to a pond bottom to enhance the camouflage on the pond bottom, which I believe that I have. Yes, okay. I have my oyster shell enhancement visualizer. So as you can see, in the background of this slide is a lovely shot of E14 with all the oyster shells that have been spread on that pond. And then in the foreground, right here, we have a beautiful female snowy plover sitting on a nest next to an oyster shell. And so you can imagine if we shrink this down and we put that plover at scale, then when you have the oyster shells on the pond, suddenly that plover is just one white blob in a sea of white blobs. And the eggs are just little brown blobs in a sea of brown blobs. And so it gets much harder, theoretically, for predators to find the nests. So this is how we spread the shells on E14. Those yellow squares were our pilot test plots that were spread in 2009. We did the initial pilot study from 2009 to 2012 to see whether the plovers actually preferentially nested in the areas with oyster shells. And at the end of those 3 years, we saw that yes, they did preferentially nest within the oyster shells. So then we expanded the shell plots and we spread way more shells. So you can see on the west side of the pond, we just kind of filled in around the pilot plots, and then on the east side, we spread a large plot just completely fresh on the east side. And so we spread that right before the 2015 season. So you can see here that this is the amount of breeding at E14 throughout the years. So you can see, I don't know what was going on from 2006 to 2011. I don't know if maybe like sometimes the pond was managed flooded and sometimes it wasn't dried down all the way. And so that was why there was like so little nesting there. I'm not sure. But you can see that once we spread those shell plots at the end of 2014 and 2015, the number of nests jumps up a lot. And it keeps going up until 2018 is the high point. That is by far the highest number of nests that we've ever had on E14. But you can also see that they didn't do that well that year. And then it's been kind of like a downward trend a little bit since then. We were kind of getting worried in like around the 2021, 2022 mark. We were kind of getting worried that maybe like E14's magic had worn off a little bit, but the last couple of years it's been going up. And then this year, if I added in the 2015 number, it would be like pretty close to the 2019 number. So it would be right back up at kind of like back to the glory days of E14. So it's still going. The oyster shells are still working. And you can see that even though the hatch rate is kind of up and down, the blue is the hatch rate. You can see that that's pretty average. It increases the amount of nesting. It doesn't necessarily increase the hatch rate, but it does increase the amount of nesting. And if the hatch rate is still the same and the nests are more, then like that's still an overall win. So we want to put more oyster shells in more places, and we are currently working on that in different places. We've spread some more shells at other ponds in Eden Landing. We've started spreading some in Ravenswood as well, and we might end up spreading some in Hayward or in Fremont. Those are a little more like up in the air. But yeah, we're still spreading shells because it's kind of a proven technique to encourage plovers to nest in an area. Oh, there's also been some spread in Mountain View. So then part five, this is the last part, just how you can get involved with plovers. So the first thing is you can volunteer with us at BBO. Oh, sorry, so sorry. Ignore that March 8th at Eden Landing. I'm so sorry. That's an old thing. I should have deleted that. But you can volunteer with us to help spread oyster shells. So we will do typically two habitat enhancement events per year. And at least one of those will be spreading oyster shells. Sometimes we're ripping out invasive plants or doing other things, but at least one of them we're typically spreading oyster shells. So we'll do one at the end of the season, in after the breeding season's over in like October, and then we'll do another one right before the next season starts in like February. So there's nothing happening for a while, but check our website. And also, you can be part of the solution. You can tell people that there are plovers in the bay. Honestly, a lot of people just don't even know because associate them so much with beaches that they don't know that there's plovers on the salt ponds. Um, and so you can let people know and tell them that there's these really cute, charismatic birds. Like, look at them in their little clump together, their little cuddle puddle. You can also be a responsible dog owner if you take your dog to the beach, or if you take them hiking. Don't take dogs in areas where they're not supposed to be, and also stay on trail. And if you have any other questions for me, you can totally reach out. That's our website, or you can also email me directly at mschwartz@sfevo.org. And I just wanted to end on this graph, which again shows that the number is going up. And if I had added in the 2025 numbers, we had a really we had a really good window count this year for 2025. And so I hope that this presentation has made you a plover lover or a plover lover, whatever you want to say. And yeah, that's it. Does anyone have any questions?
All right. Well, thanks. That was informative. That was very interesting. Okay, let me just click everything here. Let's have a look and see what people are up to in terms of questions. Uh, uh, Chat, raise hand. Anyone? Open questions yet? Okay,
I
we'll
don't see
get
anything
things.
in the chat.
No. Okay. So in reality, to have, you know, beaches where you have sand and yet nothing other than, I mean, these poor birds, they seem to have nests or scrapes or whatever. They breed where there's absolutely nothing. It's just sand.
Yeah, yeah, it's risky. It's risky for sure. That's why they rely on camouflage.
So the oyster shells seem to help a great deal, and it just seems rather remarkable to think that they would nest in such an open area uh,
Yeah,
with
yeah, it's crazy.
nothing at all to protect them. Nothing.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of birds that nest on the ground, but a lot of them will do like they'll mob predators, they'll start crying and screaming and flying up into the air and trying to chase predators away. The plovers don't do that. They just, if they see something coming, they just get up and run. They just get up and scamper away and try to be like, nope, nope, there was nothing here. Nope, you didn't see anything. Nothing here.
Right. Um, so, but aren't there snowy plovers that nest in the old growth forest,
No,
or that they fly into the old growth, or like the redwoods?
no.
No, they don't fly in there. No, seem to.
No, maybe you're thinking of merlets.
Mm,
Merlets are in the redwoods, in the old growth redwoods.
no, I don't know. I seem to remember something back from my biology days. Okay, so let's see. We have something in Q&A and we have something in chat, which is good. It's a change from what. Okay, so thanks, Maddie, for all your work and very informative presentation. Um, so thank you for your presentation. You mentioned that plovers came in after colonization. How do they impact the landscape? And did we lose other birds that might come back without the salt ponds? What do you think?
Did we lose other birds? So, okay, yes, this is an interesting question. So, I don't think that the plovers themselves impacted the landscape very much. I don't think that they were competing for any resources that weren't, um, abundantly of like made abundantly available by the salt ponds being there, like brine flies and brine shrimp and that kind of stuff. Um, Obviously the composition of species changed when um when the tidal marsh was taken away. Like that's part of why ridgeways rails and salt marsh harvest mice and stuff like that is endangered because all of these more like salt marsh dominant species, their habitat decreased. Um, so that's that's also part of the reason why people want to restore tidal marsh is to help like mouse and rail populations. So the 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 balance definitely changed, but the plovers were kind of a byproduct of the balance changing. I don't think that they were like agents of change, if that makes sense, on the salt ponds.
Well, in reality, Maddie, I mean, they have such a low impact on their environment that they don't really, they must have been here way before the Western man came in from
Yeah,
Europe.
although they weren't really in the bay. They weren't, there was only because there wasn't very much habitat for them in the bay. But I wouldn't consider them like an invasive species or anything, if that's what this person is maybe like getting towards. I wouldn't consider them an invasive species. I would say they opportunistically took advantage of habitat that humans created, once the salt ponds were created.
Right. Okay. And do there's a question whether or not there's any interbreeding between the interior and coastal populations, any evidence of that?
So I don't know if there's any evidence. I'm sure that there's something, but the reason that the Western population is the only population that's listed is because they are genetically distinct from the interior population. They do not interbreed typically with the interior population. I'm sure it's happened once or twice maybe. But they do not breed with the interior population because the interior population goes back to the interior.
Oh, so they're separate species, basically, or at least separate,
Not yet.
not yet, but they're
Yeah.
definitely keep to their own so that one flies back, the other stays on the West Coast.
Yeah. If
Yeah.
things continue, then like in a couple thousand years or whatever, they could be separate species.
Hmm. Yeah. And do the nests have to be near foraging sites, or maybe is it, or the birds just select? Obviously, it's what the birds do, what they select as a place for breeding.
I mean, they have to be pretty close to good foraging habitat because the chicks can't go very far. Because the chicks obviously can't fly. So they have to have like they like to be near like a wet-ish area. So that where all of the flies and stuff that they eat are close at hand.
So in reality, when they fledge, when is it that they actually start to fly? Because they seem to fly at least the Western ones have to fly north south, right?
They can fly as soon as they fledge, they can fly. They'll probably hang out. Um, I mean, it depends on whether it was like an earlier nest or a later nest. But like kind of in like August, September is when they start dispersing to go to their wintering grounds. Um, and then yeah, they start coming back in like February, March.
So do they? So they do try. They do migrate a bit. I mean, or even
Some of them
considerably.
stay, some of them stay.
Uh-huh. So
Yeah. But
so
if they
they're
are gonna leave, they'll leave in like August or September.
uh-huh. Okay. So what else is there? Let's see. So you can tell from the banding, right, where the birds are from?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. That was a question from Elizabeth. And then there's also It says there's also an oyster project to try to repopulate oysters in the bay. Do you
Yeah, so they're probably referring to the Wild Oyster Project. That is where we get the majority of our oyster shells. Because I see there's people are putting questions in the chat now, and I see someone asked in the chat, where do you get the oyster shells? So typically, we get our shells from the Wild Oyster Project, which is a really cool project. I urge you to check them out if you haven't. They will collect shells from restaurants and then they will cure them for multiple years to make sure that there's like the shells are completely blank. That's what they call them when they're fully cleared is blank shell. Uh, and then we will take some of the blank shell and use it to spread on the ponds. And they will use other parts of the blank shell and they'll create these like balls with them out of like net and stuff. They'll make these balls and they'll chuck the balls in the bay. And then something about the fact that there's just calcium carbonate in the water like attracts the oyster larvae to the shells and the oyster larvae will find the balls of shells and will start like using them and you can create an oyster colony that way, which is really cool. Don't ask me for any more info because I don't know anything else other than that, but that's the Wild Oyster Project. If you want to know more about them, you can go to their website, I'm sure.
Okay, so there's some questions about, well, the thing is, of course, here we are in Pacifica, and I know you don't study this area, but it if one had things fenced off to whatever degree possible, would it, do you think, help with breeding since they don't breed here?
Yeah, I mean it would. It's just a matter of like you would have to get you would have to attract a pair or two. And then those pairs would have to be successful and have chicks that fledged because the birds have nest site fidelity, so they will come back and breed in the same place where they hatched from. So once you've had successful nesting somewhere, then that will typically continue being like a successful site as long as the nests like as long as they keep hatching and some chicks keep fledging. But until you've created habitat that seems nice enough for a pair or two, like for some pairs to come and actually use the habitat, then you won't have anything. So if you fenced it off, I'm sure that would help. But also, like plovers don't understand fences. They wouldn't be flying over and be like, "Oh, look, a nice fence. Okay, we can go there," you know. So
Yeah.
it's yeah, I'm not sure how you would get birds into Pacifica, but I'm not sure.
Mm. But yeah, because you don't fence off in the bay at
Hmm.
all. It's just the natural habitat
Hmm.
with salt ponds being restored to natural conditions, and they just come in, fly in, and do their thing.
Hmm.
So there's no artificial fencing. There's nothing, no barriers put up in order to keep people out.
Yeah, I mean there's gates and fences sometimes, but it's not the same kind as like the fences and stuff that people put on the beach. Let me see. There's also questions in the chat. So I noticed part of the interior population was not on a coast. What kind of habitat are they living in? So, um, my understanding is that they are on salt pans and salt lakes, like in the Great Basin. I know that there are birds that are in the Great Salt Lake. There are snowy plovers that breed at the Great Salt Lake. I think they also will breed on like river bars and stuff like that. But I'm not sure because I have not been to Utah or Texas where those populations are. I haven't seen what they actually look like, but my understanding is it's the same kind of like dry pan, like dry salt pan or sandy substrate, but just on like rivers and lakes as opposed to the ocean.
And Alameda, do you know anything about Alameda and snowy
Yeah,
plover?
so I'm wondering if this person is confusing the plovers with the terns. because there is no plover nesting in Alameda to my knowledge, but there is a very big least tern colony in Alameda, on the former naval airstrip in Alameda. And that colony is doing pretty well, I think. It's the biggest least tern colony in the bay, and it has always been and still is. So I think it's doing pretty fine. But there isn't really plover nesting in Alameda.
Uh-huh. Okay, well, that's good it's good to be clear on that point. I'll have to have you back about the turns, right?
Yeah. And then some of the areas on the Hayward Regional shoreline are mostly closed to the public. Are there similar protections for Pond E14? Yes. That is E14 is open to the public during the winter. On one side, on the north side, pedestrians are allowed to walk along the north levee of E14 in the winter. And then as soon as the breeding season starts, there's gates that go in and get closed, and it closes off all of E14 so that the public is not allowed uh, at E14.
Right. So there is something that, yeah. Well, that's what I mean is that the the public is kept out during
Hmm.
breeding season, one way or
Hmm.
another. Somehow you keep them out so that the birds have some success in breeding.
Hmm.
Right. So, okay. So let's see what's a cooking here. Uh,
I don't have any info on plovers in Half Moon Bay. I'm sorry. I think there's state parks, California state parks people that know more about birds at Half Moon Bay. Um, Yeah, but I don't know that much. We get reports of banded birds when birders will take photos of plovers at Francis Beach and Tunitas Creek. Um, I think we've gotten photos from people at Francis Beach. I'm not sure. Tunitas Creek for sure. We've gotten photos from people there. But that's kind of our extent of like involvement in Half Moon Bay is we get photos from people and we go, thank you very much, and put them into our database. Um, is Western Snowy Plover data consolidated across all Bay Area breeding and wintering sites, Bay and ocean north to south? Yes. Wait, Bay Area breeding and wintering sites. Um, yes, I'm slightly confused by this question, but so our data, it's consolidated within the Bay Area for sure because we're the main surveyor and we consolidate all of our data. And then there's some sites that are in the North Bay. And we, I guess, don't typically take their data, but like we do know about it, and all of that data is sent to the recovery coordinator for RU3. There's a fish and wildlife person who is the species, like who's the recovery lead for plovers in RU3, and so all of everyone's data in the Bay Area gets sent to her, and then there's a species lead for the entire like population from San Diego to Washington, that everybody's data, we send it to him. So the data is consolidated both on like a small scale and a large scale. Um, yeah, it is,
well,
taken into account.
well,
And
since the
this year, the total goal for the species to be delisted, um, like the total population is 3,000 birds, and this year is the first year that we hit 3,000 birds, which is really great. The 3,000 number has to be maintained for 10 years for them to be delisted, but we hit 3,000 for the first time across the entire range. So that is great.
3,000 birds.
Yeah,
That's
for the entire range from San Diego to Washington.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So as you were saying, things are on a rebound. Things are
Yeah, things
improving.
are looking good. It's It's a more promising story than a lot of things.
Mm. So that's well, they are endangered, and if there is obviously progress with improving nesting sites and improving their actual viability in terms of having uh, live nest bird found little chicks that
Hmm.
actually survive. Because if there's a great well with the predators, you're going to lose a certain amount no matter where you are.
Hmm.
So it seems as though the success is definitely there, and that's great news. That
Hmm.
really is. I wish we could do something about Pacifica in this area and Half Moon Bay, but
Yeah.
you do need professionals to come in and help because it's not something a layperson can handle. Uh,
Yeah.
and then the city governments have to be involved too yeah. So anyway, that's a different issue altogether. But um, I think this has been most informative. And let's see, oh yeah, okay. Well, many thanks from everyone. And I'll be in touch
Okay.
probably on Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
And I just wanted to thank you and thank you for agreeing to do this for us
Yeah.
and for presenting such a informative lecture, an interesting lecture, because we really haven't had anything about snowy plovers and especially the Western Snowy Plovers. So it was
Yeah.
about time we had. So,
Yeah. Happy to do it.
all right. Well, thanks, Maddie. Thank you very much. And to all who have stayed with us and who have come aboard, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
All
Take
right.
care
Bye.
and much success to you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Okay, everyone. We're going to close up shop. There aren't too many here with us at this junction, but um, uh, I'm going to turn off the Zoom and we'll see you in January. Thank you. Take care. Happy holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, the whole bit. All right. Take care.